Hi, everyone. So, as you mentioned, today I wanted to talk to you about a mountain that's at the center of my new book project. And to do so, I'm actually going to turn to this man, Aldo Leopold, who was the founder of modern ecology. Leopold set forth a challenge that I want to revisit and reimagine today, as Leopold urged readers to set about thinking like a mountain. And what did he mean by this? He wanted individuals to angle their view upward, imagining mountains' quote, secret opinions. He had argued that mountains had lived long enough to listen objectively. If humans tried to do the same, then they might see the profound interconnection that characterized relations between all species and things. So in my talk today, I'm going to use one mountain in Colorado, Mount Emmons, which is actually reaching into the right of this image to extend Leopold's experiment. And I'm going to suggest that while thinking like a mountain helped generations to understand ecosystems, it can also be applied to and enriched by the study of history. So we're going to actually take a journey into the mountain's past, skimming stones across deep time to encounter world-changing events in just one place, an exercise we can do almost anywhere. The mountain building, colliding sovereignties, gold rushes, fossil fuel capitalism, and environmental awakenings can all be held together in layers in one place. And I'll offer that deep time perspectives can shed light on how comparatively thin the temporalities guiding much thought in modern politics and economics have been. I'll also think about how close 19th century histories are to the 21st century citizens who are navigating things like a warming world. So we'll end by considering how people, including those at MIT, are trying to mitigate social and ecological legacies together. But let's begin with transformations unfolding to the beat of geologic time. I'm just going to cover like 70 million years in a second. A small achievement. 70 million years ago, the mountain was actually under water. It was in the middle of the western interior seaway that had been founded by the colliding plates. And at the bottom of this lake, plant and animal life gathered in their death to condense over many millions of years into coal. 30 million years after that, mountain building continued. The mountain reached over 12,000 feet, and the magma within the mountain has pressed upward and created, over many millions of years after that, the minerals that would come to be valued in a much later generation. The silver, gold, and coal all became stitched together around this precise mountain. Humans, especially those hailing from Europe, would come to desire these and pursue them at an astonishing pace. So what we're actually looking at is a famous atlas by the surveyor Ferdinand Hayden, which shows the extractive activity unfolding around the mountain, which is the triangle here, and of course not to scale MIT alums. But the 12,000 years before that suggested that there were other worlds on offer. The life-giving conditions of the Holocene epoch had entangled other humans' histories with the mountain's own. Glacial retreat had carved U-shaped valleys. The snowmelts of the mountain had nourished the plant and animal species on which the Tabawachi Ute peoples would rely. Tabawachi Utes shaped this place as part of their mountain homelands and finely tuned responsiveness to the seasons. And for centuries, they hunted game, managed forests, and harvested foods and medicines, all while pursuing constantly evolving diplomatic relations with other indigenous nations and eventually European empires. Everything changed with the gold rush outside Denver in the 1860s, as miners began pressing over Ute lands, publicly celebrated as a new course of empire. As miners descended, the Tabawachi Ute leader, Chief Ouray, responded with his typical tactical mindset and tried to stem these incursions. What he did was travel to Washington, D.C. in 1868 with his friend, a trapper named Kit Carson, who was his chief advocate. And together they drafted a treaty that would cede Ute lands in return for a 15 million acre reservation in western Colorado, what you see here in yellow. And this reservation would have an eastern extent running through the meridian 107 degrees west, which would cut through and bifurcate the mountain. So from this point on, the mountain was a border between two nations, with the toe in US territory and its heart in Ute territory. But official and grassroots efforts were eroding this border from the outset. Policies culminating in the mining law of 1872 were emboldening prospectors to pursue minerals. They had been doing so, of course, for a long time, but it was technically a form of trespass. After the law, Individuals and corporations could secure vast acreage for a small fee. And the same year this mining law went into effect, miners emboldened by this law moved into the San Juan Mountain region of Colorado, depicted here in the rectangle. The Indian commissioner, Felix Bruno, on learning that the miners had uncovered gold and silver, did not reprimand the miners, but instead set about redrawing the territorial borders of the reservation to allow continued digging. Now turning to Mount Emmons, the center of our story, the triangle, there was similar activity underway as miners moved into the region and once again unearthed gold and silver. They were digging into Ute territory as part of the last charge before the US Army would march the Ute peoples away at gunpoint in 1881, opening the reservation to white settlement. The entire mountain in this moment became part of the United States. And what we can underline here is that this land seizure coincided with 50 years of activity that culled more gold and silver than the previous 3,000 years of human history before that. Elements that had taken many millions of years to go here and that for millennia had formed part of indigenous homelands. Within 2 years, the mountain was enfolded in a new set of transformations. The age of precious metals gave way to the age of fossil fuels. And the town at the mountain's base, called Crested Butte, if any of you have been there, moved from being a supplier of gold miners to a coal town in its own right. Coal was the dynamo of the 19th century at the heart of steam power and steel production, but it also brought about an energy transition of great note, one that was both fitful and fateful. What we can see here is that this transition helped to give the mountain a new name, as a new survey arrived in town and noted that some geological accidents, the same ones I described about 30 million years ago, had created something rather unusual. In this one mountain, there were two kinds of coal, both anthracite, which was rich and rare, and bitumen, that was usual in the West. It was a bit like uncovering a bit of Pennsylvania in the Rockies. But the peculiarity so captivated the surveyor, Samuel Emmons, that he named the mountain after himself. Also observing these fossil fuel transformations around the mountain was Helen Hunt Jackson, one of Massachusetts' own from Amherst and a dear friend of Emily Dickinson. She was a novelist, and she saw things a little bit differently than the coal boosters in Crested Butte. From the road leading Crested Butte, which was also a road of ancient Tabawachi Ute use, she saw Mount Emmons as overrun with asters. And by her account, it was the most beautiful scene she had ever seen. She wrote, "The coalmen who are digging, coking, selling cocaine, but selling coal opposite the aster field do not see the asters, a field that some people would rather possess for the rest of the summers of their lives than the coal bank opposite, 1,000,000 times rather." So Jackson was grieving this environmental destruction, even as she diminished the workers' field of vision in a labor of necessity. Months after her visit, in fact, the mine across from Mount Emmons exploded. The workers had unearthed methane gas or fire damp, and 59 men died in flash. What we can see here is that around Mount Emmons, where the deadliest mining disaster yet to strike the nation had happened, deep time had converged with industrial time. And it suggested, from the perspective of the mountain, some dangers of blasting through the mountain to service that expansion at the surface. Around Mount Emmons, tens of millions of tons of coal, which had been formed over eons, would be wrenched from the earth in very short order. But the explosions were only part of the trouble, as the alpine place would stand to lose much in a warming world that coal's combustion helped ignite. 1 century later, the mountain became the site of something new, a protest against multinational mining. I'll add, it's a ski protest, so that's a particular kind of protest, and it's at the heart of my new book. A group of newcomers had arrived in Crested Butte and started to orient the economy to tourism, recreation, and skiing in the 70s. They aimed to go up country roads and seek the Rocky Mountain high. And yes, John Denver was that influential. Like Helen Hunt Jackson before them, the newcomers sought the richness of and not in the Rocky Mountains. But there was a problem. The mining law of 1872 still held force. Under this law, the largest mining company in the world initiated exploration efforts on Mount Emmons for molybdenum, an element key to many infrastructures. Locating the deposit, the company planned to collapse the mountain from within and store its 99% of those contents across thousands of acres of public land. The town called it an incursion and a threat to their way of life, and they tried to say no to mining. The case of this protest was just one showdown among many in these protracted battles over globalization in the 1970s. The company cited the need for economic growth. The town sided with environmental scientists, including those based at MIT, who were cautioning that there were limits to growth, that the polluting effects of toxic tailings and the diminished biodiversity might not be worth the gains. The town fought a 4-year battle against this company, and one that culminated, to everyone's surprise, in the company backing away from the investment. The town took to Mount Emmons to celebrate from the mountaintop, but the company never really left. And in fact, the town has been fighting it ever since. On the surface, Crested Butte is very much still a scenic destination, but a deeper look shows a struggle to mitigate the ongoing effects of heavy metals in the water supply of the Superfund sites in their midst that are designated for remediation because of these successive waves of mining. The mountain's future, especially as rising temperatures change the delicate ecosystems in this alpine place, remains up for grabs. So to return to Aldo Leopold, he urged individuals to think like a mountain, a practice that can link ecological and historical perspectives. One lone mountain can hold so much non-human and human history of global significance. So 2 takeaways we might have moving forward here. Deep time perspectives do underline how short-term thinking justified violent expansion and earth moving with serious consequences that nobody really took seriously in their moment. What took millions of years to create was exploded in a flash with little regard for the people and places who would bear those burdens unevenly across the planet. Second, the perspective shows how close 21st century citizens are to those seemingly distant 19th century histories of expansion. This mining law of 1872 has hardly been revised, and it authorizes companies, including those headquartered outside the United States, to expand into lands and waters on which many rely. This includes indigenous communities in or removed from homelands with much intergenerational knowledge for managing ecosystems. Knowledge previously stomped out or attempted to be stomped out by US officials that now scientists are recognizing are vital to climate mitigation and environmental remediation. In fact, the National Science Foundation has just invested hugely in this knowledge, and MIT SHASS is a part of these transformations, emboldening indigenous knowledge for ecological well-being. Deeper perspectives suggest the urgency of trying to imagine a world that lessens social and ecological harms and aims to heal ecologies and communities together. One mountain, or any place really within reach, might be a good place to start. Thank you.